Okay. Hey, folks, James Abrenio here. Today I've got a very interesting guest, Mary Stewart. This is actually a different interview than I usually do. As you may know, we usually focus on law, Virginia policy, things like that. But Mary's actually my bookkeeper, and she's been so for, I think, about 2 years now. And I've been seeing a lot about running a business, folks wanting to start their own shop, a lot of law school graduates coming out. And for me, the biggest fear I had beyond could I make enough money to survive was how do I run my books? And I actually tried it for a period of time. It did not go so well. I think I did as good of a job as you could. But finally, I got Mary, and it's really saved me. And so, Mary, she's actually in Atlanta.
Mhm.
We've actually never met before. So, she's been working for me fully virtually. And by the way, I think there's a little bit of slow feedback on the Zoom. So, if the video is weird, I apologize. But so Mary, first of all, tell whoever's watching this how did we meet and how do we typically work together?
Okay. I think we probably met through my Facebook marketing, more than likely.
Mhm.
Otherwise it might have been through I am a QuickBooks Pro advisor,
Mhm.
so I'm also listed there. Um, and of course I have my own website, quickwinbookkeeping.com, but so it was through one of those platforms, more than likely with a reach out through DMs or something like that through Facebook.
Yeah,
Is
yeah. And what I did, and so
my
anybody,
is what I would typically expect. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
and what I did, I know at some point, I think you gave me references. So I ended up
Hmm.
calling like four or
Yep.
five different attorneys who all had great recommendations for you.
Hmm.
Um, and so, anybody worried about how it works, they can obviously reach out to me, but
Yep.
I've just found it very useful. And frankly, with today's technology, there's not a whole lot of reason for us to be sitting across each other at a desk. It's not like, you're showing me papers, you just send them a report. So,
Right.
um, so Mary, give the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into bookkeeping, and then we'll talk
Okay.
about kind of more specific questions. So,
Sure. Absolutely. So, I opened up the business in 2021. But before that, which many eons ago, that feels like,
mhm,
I started bookkeeping, or technically accounting specifically. I started training into accounting even back in high school. Did two
mhm,
years of it in high school, and then after high school, obviously got into community college, and just kind of went from there.
mhm,
I've worked at lots of different organizations, nonprofits, hospitals, small business, mom and pop shops. I've worked for a doctor. Yeah, all gambits of life, if you will. But I've always, even if what I was doing was sort of not necessarily in the accounting specific field, it never failed that it always reverted over into that direction, into
mhm,
finances in particular. Um, Worked for a lot of people helping with their finances, doing budgeting, financial reports, reporting to boards, things like that. And so when COVID hit, like so many, it was kind of hard for the business that I was working for.
mhm,
And seeing the writing on the wall, so to speak, I decided it was time to take that leap that I needed to take, and utilize my skills to help others,
mhm,
and to help small business owners in particular. I decided initially the focus was service-based industry.
mhm,
Um, but as I was working with the clients that I had, I was finding that law firms were definitely where I was more driven towards,
mhm,
for a variety of reasons. I just feel like they're kind of a little bit misunderstood. But also, you guys have your own challenges, your unique challenges, and I felt like, you know what, this is really where I can help.
mhm.
And that's just where I'm just driven to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and I really think helping you with, not just the books. To me, it's about helping your business,
Mhm,
helping you have an understanding and a clearer understanding of what your numbers are telling you.
mhm,
And so it just drives me, because it's to help you elevate you where you need to be. and know what's going on. Like if you don't
Yeah.
know what's going on, I see all sorts of things. Like some just have no clue what's going on, and others they kind of do, but they need a little bit of guidance, or
Mhm.
you know, they just need to be able to see the numbers, and they need to be accurate. That's,
Mhm.
to me, that's my big driving point, is I want to make sure that what you're getting is accurate.
Mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, and I will tell you, as I said before, my biggest fear beyond can I run a practice and
Mhm.
help clients was the money side of things. And
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
what I've really liked about what you've done is, first of all, because I tried a couple QuickBooks Pros, and like I had one guy, literally, I was like, "Hey, look, it looks like the trust accounting is not accurate," and he's just like, "Oh, it's not a big deal." And I said, "It's not a big
Oh,
deal. What are you talking about?" And in
oh,
fact,
oh, I'd never. Oh my
that's when
goodness.
I actually tried to start doing it myself because he had screwed something up and literally
Oh,
it caused the numbers to be off for like a year. So I finally just
mhm,
decided to do it myself, and then I had to go back and fix it. And I hope it's correct. Um, but what also I've the reason I started my firm is I wanted flexibility, and my
mhm.
thought was always, if I do good work and I keep my expenses low, I don't go out and buy a new Mercedes Benz every week. I don't spend a ton of money on a huge office space. With our technology and what I do as a litigator, I just need to be in court when I need to be in court, and I need to research when I need to research, and need to be able to
Right.
communicate when I need to communicate.
Absolutely. You need to be
Um,
able to do your lawyer things.
yeah. So
Absolutely.
tell um, us what you do for me, because you do. It's not just do I get the P&L. It's you also do some evaluations for me. So talk about that and
Yeah,
how
yeah. I
how you find that helpful. Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. No, obviously the data is the numbers, right? But and keeping up with things. Obviously, you mentioned earlier the trust. Trust is huge for a law firm.
Yeah.
Now, not all our firms, I have actually learned that not all our firms have to deal with trust, but obviously a huge majority do.
Mhm.
And so you got to make sure you're in compliance. So that, yes, that's a huge piece of what we do, is making sure, and I'm all about making sure those numbers match. And if they don't
Yeah.
match, there's something wrong, right? Like
Yeah.
you said. And it is a big deal, because
Yeah.
that's your
And
license.
yeah. Well, yes. It's interesting because I read Virginia State Bar ethics complaints and reports all the time, and more than lying to the court, more than prosecutors hiding evidence, it's screwing around with trust accounts that have people lose their licenses or get
Hmm.
suspended. And I do want to be clear, a couple things for people that are concerned about, virtual support is, number one is, it's not like you have access to my accounts and are moving money around. You're literally just
Oh gosh, no, and I don't.
documenting.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then with a lot of the practice management softwares, I use Practice Panther. The trust accounting is actually done within that program as well. So I've also got my side of things verifying what you're
Hmm.
doing. So
Hmm.
it's a double check. And it just, again, it's another set of eyes from somebody that deals with numbers. So that's what makes
Right,
it good for
right,
me.
right.
Um,
And then that helps us take sort of that administrative piece.
yeah,
You don't have to sit there and focus on that. You can focus on what you're
yeah,
doing, and taking care of your clients,
it,
right? But
yeah,
as far as the financial, I think I do a financial review for you. And so what that is, that's where we start looking at like trends, like
mm,
what's the expense trends? Is it happening every month the way it should?
yeah,
Like you can, there's so many things you can actually glean out of even the basic reports.
mm,
And that, whether it's the trends are matching up the way they should be.
mm,
You can catch things like if there's, we've had times when we see like charges suddenly going through somebody's card like 3 or 4 times, and we're like, whoa,
mm,
we can alert them, right? And say there's something off here. Or if you're struggling and you need to see where you need to start cutting costs, we can kind of
mm,
help you check those trends and see what needs to happen, right?
mm.
Or hey, it's time to go talk to this vendor, and depending on what the situation is, there's so many variables. It's way too many to number,
Yeah.
or to name. But yeah, giving you the financial reports is great.
Mm.
giving you the reviews to be able to kind of elevate that a little bit more and say, okay, so here's what I'm seeing.
Mhm.
And, if there's an issue, I can point it out, say, hey, this looks like something might be happening here. Or even just a lot of people don't think about their cash flow and making sure that they've got enough cash in their business. And I think that's one of the big things I tend to see is they think, oh, well, I'm making profits, so my cash should be fine, right? But it's not. It's not always. I won't say it's not. It's just not always. So those are things that I can help you keep an eye on with doing the reviews and such.
Yeah, and what I've liked about working with you is there have been times where, like, I know in my mind, I'm like, okay, I cut that check. I'm sure Mary's going to be asking about this because it's an unusual transaction or a complicated disbursement where, in fact, I think you got a pending question out to me about a complicated disbursement I did where there's, multiple lien holders for PI cases and things like
Hmm.
that. And
Hmm.
inevitably you say, hey, what the heck's going on? And the fact that you're asking me those questions lets me know that you're obviously very diligent in it. But it also, again, as me as a trial attorney, I want to be told if something doesn't look right. And again,
Hmm.
I'm not the expert in numbers, so it's been super helpful for me.
Hmm.
Let me ask you this, if you could, because you've worked with a lot of lawyers, you're working with a lot of lawyers. What are some of the most common mistakes that you're seeing us making, whether it's from the technical side or, you're talking about cash flow, maybe from the 1,000-foot view side? What are you seeing, and what, you know, tidbits of advice would you be throwing out there if you had top
Right.
10 list, for instance?
Let's see. I would say, like I said, cash flow is I see a lot focus in on the bottom line, and
Mm,
they just think, oh, well, I'm making profits, I should be doing fine.
mm,
And I'd say one of the ones that immediately comes to mind is if you're taking draws, depending on your structure of your business, whether you're taking draws, distributions, whatever, and making sure that those align right with your
mm,
cash to make sure that you're not going to hurt the business, right?
mm,
Another one I see is I often see some don't think about like making sure they have a cash reserve
mm,
so that they can weather the storms of those difficult months, right?
mm,
I mean, eh, depending on the type of service, I'd say for like personal injury, if you're a solo, personal injuries, it could be it could be a couple months before you get that out, right? So what do you do in the meantime? And so thinking of those things and making sure you're thinking about the cash flow and how it's working for your business, or even just like if you're wanting to, if there's a business that say they don't have the best, like you've got Practice Panther, right?
mm,
It
mm.
works really well for you. But
Yeah.
I see other ones that they're not sure what works well, so
Mm,
they want to switch.
mm.
And if you want to switch, that's great. But as you know, those things cost a lot,
Yeah.
right? I mean, those are really huge. Well, if you're not in the best position and you go and just make that switch, that's a huge hit on your cash.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that we can help you like look at. Is
Mm,
it the right time to make that kind of switch? What can you do? And think
yeah.
just little things like that that might seem like trivial
Yeah.
can trigger something else down the road. So that's what we can help you with.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that because, before I started my firm, I was with another firm and we were looking at transition practice management programs. When I started this firm, I obviously looked at a ton of different ones.
Hmm.
I will say, from my experience, for what it's worth, I would suggest just pick one and learn how to use it correctly. Whether it's Clio or Practice Panther, I've heard Filevine's pretty good. I've heard My Case. I've used My Case before. I think they're all very good in their own ways. It's just, you can
They're
all, the
tools.
grass is always greener.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
so that's just my advice for folks thinking about, should I switch my practice management? Just learn, if you're using yours 1,000%, then it'll work just fine. This is not rocket science what we're doing here.
They're tools. They're
Yeah.
meant to be a tool to help you with whatever you need. I actually follow with I would agree with that. Just make it work for what you're needing.
Let me ask you this, because we're talking about cash flow. What are some of the biggest common mistakes you see new law firms, or maybe old law firms, in wasting their money? They're just throwing away cash that you think is, and you see it across the trend, that people probably should be thinking twice about before they start spending money on.
Hmm, that's a good question. Believe it or not, that one's not, I don't see it as too big of an issue most of the time.
Really?
Because
Okay.
I would say most lawyers that, again, I'm seeing most that I've worked with,
Mm.
especially if they're starting out and
Mm.
they're kind of on the just getting going, kind of, they tend to be a little bit more cautious.
Okay. Interesting.
And believe me, and I probably, because in my mind, I'm comparing it to say, like, I've got contractors and stuff, and they
Yeah.
are completely different mindset, like so totally different. They are the ones that I tend to see bigger issues with for the most part. So law firms typically do pretty good.
Really? Okay.
Obviously I would say, just make sure that you're, one, make sure you're getting those reports. I do have
Mm.
one that I've spoken with that they weren't even getting reports. Like they were not getting those reports so they could see what was happening in their books, but like once a year. And
Wow.
that
Okay.
I can't imagine being able to know what you can do when you're doing that.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is don't just look at your bank statement and assume that the bank statement is telling you what you need,
Mm.
because it's not.
Yeah. What expound on that? What do you mean by that? What are the concerns when they do that?
I see a lot that will look at their bank statement and they think, well, that's where I'm at money wise.
Mm.
I've actually worked with and working with a firm right now that was very often the practice in the past.
Mm.
And in fact, the owner would decide when to take his distribution based off the bank statement. But
Mm.
that wasn't the whole full picture.
Mm.
Um, as you know, when you write checks, you go to send checks out. That doesn't necessarily mean they're cashed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And if you're looking at the bank statement or the bank balance, even if you sign in online and you're like, okay, well, there's the bank balance today, that doesn't necessarily tell you the right answer,
Yeah.
because that's just telling you what the bank has seen so far.
Mm.
And there could be so many other factors that's going on. As you know, transactions in general, if you're, through law pay or practice panther or whatever system you're using for your merchant, those can take a couple days sometimes
Mm.
before between the time that it's coming in to the time that's going out.
Mm.
And again, it's all depending on the type of law firm structure it is, etc. But all that can create variables from a day-to-day standpoint. And you can't always look at that either, because what about those typical rent? What
Yeah.
if you haven't paid rent yet and you didn't think about that when you went to go, okay, that's got plenty of money. And your money, if your money's already tight and you're
Mm.
doing that at a time that you're tight, you're making it worse,
Yeah.
right? And that's where that cash flow, understanding and really paying attention to that cash flow is to me a really key piece that I've seen. Um, but otherwise, I'd say, just be mindful of the things that you're purchasing.
Mm.
Like you said, software for you guys is unbelievably high.
Yeah.
Software and merchant fees, I've noticed, are the two biggest expenses for any law firm.
Mm.
Um, and so everything else, like after that, needs to be thought of as after that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And including, unfortunately, paying yourself. So you
Mm.
just have to be mindful of what you're doing. Um, so those to me are the big key pieces, I would say, for law firms. And that's
Yeah.
including supplies. If you
Yeah.
if you're at the point that you need staff, make sure that you can cover it,
Mm.
things like that.
Yeah.
And have somebody, if you don't know finances, it's okay that you don't know finances. Get somebody that's going to help you with it. It's going to be able to, and
Yeah.
just like anything else, there's plenty of them out there that say they can,
Yeah.
that might not be at the level that you're needing. And that's okay. If you
Mm.
figure that out, then move on. But make sure you're getting those financials and make sure you're learn them. If you
Mm.
don't understand them, that's okay too. You don't have to know them all. But go out there and get the information so you can, at least when you see them and get them, you have at least a general idea
Mm.
of what you're working with. That would be my big first advice as a getting out there and getting started.
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about the cost of software, but honestly, and I've been practicing about 15 years when the software wasn't that great. And then as
Yeah.
we went into COVID, I mean, the software is so valuable now that, it is the one thing. Yeah, it's expensive, but I wouldn't second guess the payments.
Oh,
Just so
no, no,
worth
no,
it.
no, because it's absolutely because it's taking it's there's just so many pieces. I couldn't even begin to get into all that, but
Yeah.
um it's a key component that I don't see how anyone could work without one at
Yeah.
this point.
You
No,
know,
absolutely.
the other thing that I found interesting is you started your business when COVID hit. So
Yeah.
I imagine a lot of your law firms you're working with do a lot of virtual or mixed use, right? Mixed practice, meaning not huge offices for the most part, starting, or is that not am I assuming wrong?
No, no, you're not wrong. I've had definitely a mix.
Mm.
Pardon me if the background, I don't know if you can hear
Oh, you're
that.
good. You're good.
Yeah, I've got a good mix.
Mm.
I've got a good mix actually. I've
Okay.
got some that got nice size offices, and I've got some that have the little small office. I've
Mm.
even had one that for he started off working at home,
Mm.
and then before he got an office that he could kind of meet up with people. So
Mm.
yeah. Um,
Well, that's cool. Okay.
Again, it's all about the size and where
Yeah.
you're at, you know.
Okay.
Just don't go beyond your means. And
Yeah.
you know, there is a movement, if you will. There's a book out there called Profit First.
Mm.
I have read through most of it.
Mm.
Um, I think what I like about the concepts is it's about the mindset. I don't necessarily use it for my practices, but I do feel that the concept of getting your mind in the right place of the whole concept of what I've gotten from it is just be mindful of when you've got your profits coming in,
Mm.
don't go just spending just because you can spend. Like, don't
Yeah.
just
And
be
I've heard of
mindful
that
about what you're
book.
spending.
Yeah,
Be
I've heard of
mindful of
that
what you're
book.
spending.
I've heard of that book. Can you just give us kind of, I think that sort of summarizes it, but just kind of a more 1,000 foot view of what that book is about?
It's about making sure that you as an owner are able to bring home some profits,
Yeah.
meaning pay yourself.
Yeah.
It's really that's the focus.
Yeah.
And there's the main one that's a profit first, and then there's a bunch of derivatives
Yeah.
underneath that people have kind of taken that, and then with the author's obviously permission, have sort of tailored it to different areas. But as an overall, it's about making sure that you can bring home the money yourself
Yeah.
too, and not spend out your profits to the point that you don't have money, you
Well,
know.
and I'll just tell
And
you from,
which a lot of people run into is that
yeah.
they're like, that's the other part. That's why I got into the cash flow talk is I've seen so many that they have profits, they
Mm.
see the bottom line, but then they're like, I see these profits, but I don't have any money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, that's where the cash flow comes in. And that mindset of don't just spend just because you have it,
Yeah.
spend what you need
Mm.
to be
Mm.
spending on. So as long as you're keeping it there, that's sort of the key point.
Yeah. And I'll tell you from an advocacy standpoint, I learned early on, and I think there's a lot of very public examples that you cannot be a good lawyer if you're living paycheck to paycheck, if you're constantly worrying about making payroll, if you can't afford the basics, the software we're talking about.
Right.
Um, and I do see people that don't make the effort to try to understand the finances behind their practice, and it ends up hurting clients.
Yes.
And frankly, I think a lot of the times you see issues with trust accounting. I think a lot of that can be attributed to somebody saying, well, let me just take a quick loan. I'll pay it before anybody notices. And then they get, first of all, that's not legal. But secondly,
Right.
they get caught up and all of a sudden now they're facing disciplinary charges and maybe criminal charges. So,
Right.
um,
And I think a lot of it sometimes I think you'd find that some they didn't know what they didn't know.
yeah.
And it's more they didn't know to keep up and pay
Mm.
attention. And when those numbers get off, why did they get off? And
Mm.
making sure that they're doing the reconciles, or maybe not them, but hiring someone or whatever they need to do, making sure that that's happening so that everything's lining up the way it should be.
Yeah.
And that's the key point is because that's money being given to you that's being entrusted
Mm.
uh to you, but it's not your money.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not yet. Right.
let's get a little bit more technical. What are the most important documents that we as attorneys should be looking for from our bookkeepers, and kind of some of the basics? So P&L, balance sheet, that kind of stuff. Explain those basic concepts.
You're definitely your main three reports that you should always be getting is your profit and loss, your balance sheet, and to me, also your cash flow,
Mhm.
which is probably the most misunderstood one. And I've even seen CPAs, like I worked for a CPA who tried to do some bookkeeping, and he just was like, "Oh, the cash flow doesn't need to go out." What? What?
Yeah,
He does, they need this. They need
yeah,
this information. What are you saying? But your profit, I mean, I think everybody, for the most part, gets the general idea of what your profit and loss report
yeah,
is. You also hear it called income statement,
yeah.
either one. But it's going to show you what your revenue is. It's
Mhm.
going to show you what your expenses were, and then it's going to tell you what the profits were off of it,
Yeah.
right? That's the basic concept.
Mhm.
That's it in a nutshell. But it can tell you even more than that, obviously. As I
Mhm.
said, if you're watching it for month to month, you're
Mhm.
seeing spreadsheet. Like I always like to include the month to month, because just seeing 1 month, you're not gonna remember what happened last month. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
busy.
yeah,
Owners are busy.
yeah.
And so I like to make sure I'm showing you your trends so that you can at least take a glance at it, right?
Mhm.
Um, it is a key piece. Your balance sheet, the one of the biggest pieces that you can get out of it is you can find out what your net worth is for your business.
Mhm.
Um, and that's going to fall under the equity side. But it also, that's an area that you can keep an eye on. Like, does the bank balance look right to you? Like,
Mhm.
it's not going to be exact to the exact whatever you go sign in on the bank. We're not looking for that. But obviously, if there's like, $6,000 or $7,000 difference, then that's, what's going on.
Yeah.
Was there a check that went out that shouldn't have, or whatever, right?
Mhm.
There's, it's keeping a basic idea of there. But that's also where you can see your trusts and your liability,
Mhm.
and you can see, do they match up? And if they don't match up, to me, that's one of the law on a law firm side. That's a key area to look at.
Mhm.
Like as soon as I'm getting a new client or a lead, and I'm taking a look at their books to see what's going on, that's one of the key pieces I look at, is like,
Mhm.
do those numbers match? And if they don't match, something's not right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there could be slews of reasons as to why they're off. And it could be just entry errors to who knows what, right? Um, but that's the key area to look at in the balance sheet. And then like I said, your cash flow.
Mhm.
Cash flow is a little trickier to read
Mhm.
by far, but I'd say if you don't understand the top part, that's okay. You can still move to the bottom, just like on the profit and loss, and see what that is. And if it's either going to be a negative number, or it's going to be a positive number. And if it's a positive number, you're in the right direction.
Okay.
If it's a negative number, then you're not going in the right direction. Then you're starting to have cash flow issues. And I'd even say, unfortunately, most of the software I've found, it's harder to get them to show like a monthly. But try and keep an eye on that each month. And depending on who you have working for you
Mhm.
doing this, if they can provide you something that can kind of help you keep an eye on that, make sure that number's always above zero.
Mhm.
Again, positive. You want to the more often that you've got positive, then you're doing good.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, the other thing I always try to strongly suggest is make sure you have a cash reserve, or at least aim for it. You're not going to start off with it, right?
Yeah.
Your first few years, you're going to be struggling with whatever, but try and aim for trust. Once you start getting in there and getting a feel for it, then start aiming for having cash reserve for your business. As a rule of thumb, it's at least 3 months
Mhm.
to cover all whatever your typical expenses are for 3 months, and aim for that. That's what I would put out there as the overall to be looking for.
That's super useful. Let me ask you this. If somebody's working with a bookkeeper, do you have some tips that you would recommend the attorney do to make their bookkeeper's life easier?
Answer questions.
Okay.
um uh I would say definitely, honestly, I think making sure the software, to me, the tricky part is the reports and the software. The
Mhm.
software, especially the practice management, always want to charge additional to even have them be connected.
Mhm.
So you have to, I think, weigh out, is it better to have them connected where they can go and get that information for you, you know. And I think once you get to a certain level, it
Yeah.
probably is,
Yeah.
right? But at the lower level, it's like those, like, no, it's not an expense that's worth it, right?
Yeah.
Then just make sure that just make sure you're getting them the details that they need,
Mhm.
really. And just and of course, if they have questions, answer them as quickly as you can. Obviously,
Mhm.
we know that you're busy.
Mhm.
Any bookkeeper that's working with a law firm or any business for that matter, but I feel like especially law firms, because
Mhm.
you guys are, dealing with your clients and you're going to court and things like that. You're not sitting at your desk, right?
Mhm.
So we don't expect that you can answer your questions all the time, but as long as you could do that in a timely manner, that's really all that matters. And I don't really have that issue with most law firms. So, um, but still something to be mindful of. Yeah.
Yeah.
The sooner
That's
you're able to get us answers, the sooner we can get you the reports that you need to be able to keep an eye on your business.
Yeah, and look, if you're considering starting your own firm or you just started it, I mean, having this information, it's the lifeline of your business.
Hmm.
And so if you hire somebody and then you can't get them the information they need to do their job, I mean, it's just you're not only frustrating them, but you should be frustrating yourself because
Absolutely.
how do you do your job if you don't have the information? So.
Right. Right.
Um, do you have I have a lot of people ask me about the best account bookkeeping software, QuickBooks. I think there's some other ones on the market.
Hmm.
I'm forgetting there's a few
There's
other
zero. There's
Zero is
zero.
one of them.
Um, yeah, there's quite a few out
Do
there,
you have
depending.
any that you prefer or do you all do all QuickBooks or what's your thoughts on that?
Right now we are working primarily with QuickBooks,
Mm,
in particular QuickBooks Online.
mm,
But as far as to me, again, like you said with the practice management, I feel like this is our version of the same
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
There's plenty out there that we can work with, but it's a tool, and
Okay.
we have to realize it is a tool. They're upgrading it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've actually thought about, and I probably will eventually, open up into Zero is the
Mm-hmm.
other one that's kind of a close competition, I feel like. Um, and again, it's also dependent on the size of the firm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because the more bigger you are, the more complex things become, right?
Certainly. Yeah.
And yes, I think it's possible to grow out of like stuff like QuickBooks and Zero and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it takes a while,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
especially from the start off to, wherever you go. Um, but again, I think that each one is a tool.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to understand the tool. And if you don't want to understand the tool, get someone that does.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't have to understand the entire tool to get what you need out of it. Um, does it cover every single aspect? Probably not, but
Mm-hmm.
there's, I feel like they could possibly have a little bit more robust. Some of the reports could be a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more robust, but I can still get the primaries that I need, and I can get more than that as well. Um, but I've always been a software-based type person, so
Yeah.
I've always, yeah, I can get stuff out of Microsoft Word that most people would be like, "Wait, you can do that in Word?"
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so from that perspective, yes, I can get the tool to tell me what I need it to.
Yeah.
Um, does
Let
that
me
kind of help answer that?
That does.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because obviously, you're the bookkeeper. I assume you recommend everybody have an accountant, right, to file their taxes and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely.
What,
Yeah.
if I am looking for an accountant or I have an accountant, what do you think, what would you recommend an attorney look for in finding an accountant or making that accountant jobs easier as well?
For your taxes, for tax time,
Yeah,
etc.
so and I ask you questions like this all the time, like, hey, what should I be asking this guy, or what does he need? Do you
Hmm.
have any recommendations to you as the bookkeeper for attorneys to make their taxes easier to work with that accountant?
Hmm. Well, again, this is where the bookkeeping side of it is a huge piece.
Yeah.
While it is its own separate thing, and
Hmm.
tax people focus on taxes, and bookkeepers hopefully are focusing on books. And they have their own nuances, but if your books are in a good place,
Hmm.
that's a huge big piece that can go over to your CPA.
Hmm.
And as long as you've got that in good order,
Mm,
then they're going to get most of what they need out of that as far
mm,
as for your business is concerned.
mm, mm.
The other thing would be if you have if you have assets that are tied to the business, which I don't see as much with law firms, to be
Yeah.
honest. But if you happen that you did, then you want to make sure you've got your documentation and stuff
Okay.
to be able to present to them. So that's probably the key thing. And then just any other documentation like that if you're going to them to have do both.
Mm,
And typically I'd recommend that probably they will.
mm,
Then just make sure you've got all your documentation. That's really the
mm.
key piece, even from a tax side, because I have done taxes as well.
Yeah.
Is it still about having that documentation? If you've bought stuff, if you've got retirement funds that you purchased throughout the year, or if you do investing or whatever it is on your personal side, you bought a house, you bought a car, whatever it is, just make sure you've got your documentation and you're ready to provide it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you think would be useful that we haven't talked about, in as far as what you do, making your job easier, or any pieces of advice you got that you haven't already given us?
Mm,
That's a
that's a
broad
good one.
question.
It is a broad
Yeah.
question. I would say just make sure that I guess because I'm kind of going through it myself, for my firm, if you will,
Yeah.
is on a operational side, just make sure you're getting things that you need done. On an operational side, there, whether it's your mindset, go keep educating yourself,
Mhm.
right? Make sure you're getting empowered, not just on the for your clients. It's going to help you, but believe it or not, even when you're helping your own mindset, you're going to also help your clients. Like you
Yeah.
said earlier, if you're too busy struggling and trying to make sure that you're, being able to pay yourself or pay whoever you've got or
Mhm.
pay your bills, right? If you're too busy struggling with all those, then it's gonna reflect back out, right?
Yeah.
So whatever's coming in is also can reflect out.
Yeah.
So keep educating yourself, whether it's for finances, whether it's for the law side, whether it's for running a business,
Mhm.
whatever it is, keep educating yourself.
Well, look, Mary, this was super helpful. I hope that anybody that watches this found it helpful. I'm going to put your information in the notes below so they
Okay,
can reach out to you. If anybody has any questions, obviously they can reach out to me as well. But look, I appreciate you talking with me for a few minutes, and I also appreciate
absolutely.
all the work you've done to help us,
Absolutely.
as we grow a little bit and try to do some good work for
Yeah,
some needy people. So thank you for
absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
All
Thank you
right.
for
Well, I appreciate it. Have a good day, and
you.
we'll talk soon. I'm sure I got some questions that you need answered.
Absolutely. Thank
Okay,
you so
cool.
much, James.
Yeah.